The cameras were already rolling when Bill Maher leaned forward, raised an eyebrow, and said with a smirk, "Tell me, Senator, are you really carrying a Bible in your jacket, or is that just for show?" Laughter erupted from the audience, sharp and loud like a late-night comedy cue. On the other side of the stage, Senator John Kennedy sat still, his back straight, hands calmly folded on his lap. He didn't flinch, didn't return the smirk. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, worn Bible, and placed it gently on the table between them. The room quieted just slightly, not completely, but enough to feel the tension shift. Bill scoffed again, louder this time, as if inviting the crowd to follow him into mockery. "Is that the part where the sky opens up and angels start singing?" he joked, grinning wide, drinking in the approval of the audience. Another burst of laughter, but Kennedy's eyes didn't leave him. They weren't angry or defensive. They were patient, focused. And then he said the words that made the laughter stop cold. "No, sir. This is the part where a man on the edge of a bridge put down the bottle, stepped away from the railing, and lived to hold his daughter again." The silence was immediate and total. Kennedy's voice was calm, but it carried weight, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. "You see, years ago, I met a man named Mark, homeless, addicted, broken in ways most of us will never understand. He'd lost his wife to cancer, lost his job, lost his son to the streets. And one night, standing on a bridge in Baton Rouge, ready to end it all, he reached into his coat for the flask he always kept in his pocket. But instead, he found something else. A single page. Psalm 34. Torn from a motel room Bible. He didn't even remember putting it there. Kennedy looked out at the audience now, not to persuade them, but to let them into the story. He read it, right there in the wind and the dark. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." That verse, it didn't erase the pain, didn't give him all the answers, but it gave him enough to live one more day and the day after that. For a moment, no one moved. Even Bill Maher shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, as if trying to decide whether this was still entertainment or something far more dangerous truth. Kennedy continued, his voice lowering like a reverent hush. "That man lives in Shreveport now, runs a small repair shop, teaches Bible study to young men trying to stay sober, says he doesn't know where he'd be if that verse hadn't been there. He says it wasn't just ink on paper, it was a voice, a whisper, a hand reaching into his chaos." And that's when something happened in the studio that producers didn't plan for. A middle-aged woman in the third row quietly covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. A young man near the back sat frozen, his eyes wide, knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. No punchlines, no laughter, just a room full of people realizing this wasn't going the way they thought. Bill Maher forced a chuckle. "Touching stories, Senator, but we're not here to do Sunday school." He tried to lighten the mood, tried to drag the moment back into satire, but the spell had been cast, and the audience wasn't biting. Kennedy didn't respond. He didn't have to. The air itself had changed. And you, sitting there right now, if your heart is beating a little harder, if your throat feels just a little tight, maybe it's because you've stood on your own metaphorical bridge once. Maybe you've felt the silence of the world pressing in and wondered if anyone sees you. If that's true, I want you to do something simple. Hit the like button and comment the number 9 below. Not because it's magic, not because it fixes everything, but because it says one thing loud and clear. I'm still here. I'm still listening. And maybe, just maybe, I need to hear more. Because what's coming next, it changes everything. Bill Maher leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the armrest, as if trying to reclaim control of the room with sheer body language. He gave a crooked smile, the kind that hides a flicker of frustration beneath layers of sarcasm. "So what you're saying," he began, drawing out the words slowly like bait, "is that a torn-up page from an ancient religious manual is now your version of psychiatric treatment?" There was a ripple of awkward laughter from a few in the crowd, mostly unsure whether to laugh or to wait. But the tone had shifted. Everyone felt it. Bill was pushing harder, trying to bring the conversation back onto familiar ground intellectual dominance, mockery, control. The crowd was used to watching him outwit, outtalk, and outmaneuver his guests. But tonight, that formula was breaking, and he knew it. Senator Kennedy didn't blink. He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, voice soft but immovable. "No, Bill," he said. "I'm saying that sometimes the human soul doesn't need treatment. It needs truth. And the truth is, some wounds don't heal by reason. They heal by grace." He paused, letting the words settle like dust over a battlefield. You can medicate pain, debate pain, even monetize pain, but there's only one thing I've seen that actually redeems it. And it's not a TED Talk or a book deal. It's what that man on the bridge found when he thought nothing was left. Bill opened his mouth to respond, but Kennedy raised a hand, not rudely, but with authority that came not from arrogance, but experience. "You brought me on here to talk about faith," he said, "but what I hear is fear. Fear that faith is foolish, that it's outdated, that it's powerless." And maybe that's not because you hate faith, Bill, maybe. It's because you once wanted to believe and it let you down. That landed like a grenade. The audience gasped visibly, audibly, as if Kennedy had suddenly turned the whole interview into a mirror. Even Bill looked rattled. He swallowed hard, shifted in his seat, and for a moment, the sharp-tongued host looked human. "That's a neat little story arc you've crafted there," he said, his voice lower, almost cautious now. "But what about the people who never get their miracle? What about the ones who pray and nothing happens?" Kennedy leaned back, nodding slowly as if Bill had just asked the most important question of the night. "That's fair," he said. "But let me tell you something, and this isn't theory. My sister prayed for her husband through 6 years of cancer. He died anyway. Do you think her prayers were wasted?" He shook his head. Because they didn't change the outcome, they changed her. They gave her the strength to sit by his bedside, night after night, whispering hope into a world that tried to drown it out. They helped her look her children in the eye and tell them that pain doesn't get the final word. There was no applause, just stillness, a kind of sacred silence that falls over a room when something raw is exposed, not as entertainment, but as truth. And then it happened. From somewhere in the second row, a man stood up. He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. He just said, loud enough for the cameras to catch, "That Bible saved my life too." Gasps filled the air. Bill turned to the producers, then back to the man. The camera cut to his fascia, 30-something veteran with a slight tremble in his voice, but fire in his eyes. "I carried one through 2 tours in Afghanistan," he said. "It didn't make me bulletproof, but it gave me something to hold when everything else was gone." A few people clapped then more, until the whole studio was filled with hesitant, human, vulnerable applause. Bill Maher looked stunned, almost betrayed by his own stage. His empire of irony had just been punctured by a parade of real people hurting people whose stories couldn't be laughed away. He looked at Kennedy with something that almost resembled respect, or at least recognition. "You're not here to argue, are you?" he asked, quieter now. Kennedy shook his head. "I'm here to remind people that even in a world that makes fun of faith, there's still room for it to save a life." The lights above didn't change. The set design stayed the same. But the room? The room was different now. What began as a televised takedown had turned into a live confession booth. And somewhere in that uncomfortable stillness, a new kind of question hung heavy in the air. Not, is God real? But what if I've been wrong about all of this? You felt that too, haven't you? Watching this unfold, wondering if maybe, just maybe, faith is more than a crutch, it's a compass. And if something in you stirred tonight, something small but stubborn, I want you to stop scrolling. Hit that like button. Leave a 9 in the comments. Not for algorithms, for you. Because if one torn page can pull a man back from the edge, maybe one comment can say what words can't. I'm listening. I'm wondering, and I want to hear what comes next. Bill Maher sat unusually still, his fingers no longer tapping, his trademark smirk retreating into something far more unsettled. He glanced sideways, not at Kennedy, but at the crowd, the same crowd that once hung on his every quip, now leaning forward, their expressions softened, eyes glistening, some even clasping their hands together unconsciously. The audience wasn't here for a laugh anymore. They were waiting for something real. Bill cleared his throat, trying to shake the weight off his chest. "Okay," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "You've got your story, Senator. I'll give you that. But don't you think you're selling a fantasy? A coping mechanism for people who can't handle reality?" His tone was sharp, but the edge had dulled. He wasn't mocking, no way was defending. Kennedy didn't strike back. He nodded slowly, almost with empathy. "You know, Bill," he said, "I think people handle reality better when they know it's not all there is." Then, almost without warning, Kennedy reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a small, folded envelope. He held it for a moment, eyes resting on the name scribbled across it like it held a weight that memory couldn't erase. "This came to my office 6 weeks ago. he said. From a young man named Tyler in Chicago, 18 years old. His father overdosed on fentanyl. His mother hasn't spoken to him in 3 years. Tyler wrote to me because he'd seen a clip of me talking about Jesus in a town hall meeting. Not politics, just faith. He said he was on the verge of ending his life, but something in what I said made him pause. He borrowed a Bible from a shelter. Didn't even know where to start. Just opened it. Landed on Psalm 139. Kennedy's voice trembled just enough to show he wasn't reciting lines. She was reliving something. Tyler said when he read, "You knit me together in my mother's womb," he started crying. Because for the first time, he thought maybe his life wasn't an accident. Maybe he mattered. He looked up at Bill, at the audience, then down at the envelope. He wrote me to say thank you, not for saving him, but for reminding him that he was seen, that he wasn't invisible. A soft sniffle echoed through the studio. The camera panned across rows of stunned faces. What was the show turning into? No one had expected a late-night conversation to veer into sacred territory, but that's exactly what was happening. And then came the twist that no one, not even Kennedy, expected. A woman from the audience stood up. Her voice was shaky, but loud enough to be heard. That psalm, that same verse, saved me too. She clutched something in her hand, a necklace with a tiny silver cross. When I was 15, I was abandoned. I used to scream into my pillow at night, thinking no one heard me. I didn't believe in anything. But then one day, I found a Bible in a thrift store. I opened it to that exact chapter, Psalm 139. I still have the page. It's in my wallet right now. Bill looked up slowly, clearly rattled. His eyes darted from the woman to Kennedy to the crowd and back. This was no longer a debate. It was a movement, a wave of raw testimony crashing against the studio walls, dismantling every scripted expectation. Kennedy gently turned toward Bill, and his voice grew softer, more personal. You see, Bill, we don't tell these stories because we're trying to win an argument. We tell them because they're true, because they happened, because they matter. He paused. And because someone watching this right now needs to know they're not alone. They need to know that even if they're sitting in the dark, staring at a bottle, a bridge, or a razor blade, there is still light. There is still a voice calling out to them. The studio lights suddenly felt warmer, not by design, but by something else, something intangible. A few people in the audience were openly crying now, others holding back tears with trembling hands. The tension that once crackled between Maher and Kennedy had transformed into something deeper. A shared silence, a sacred hush. Bill leaned forward, visibly shaken, his voice quiet, almost distant. What if I don't want to believe? What if I just can't? His words hung heavy in the air. Kennedy didn't rush his answer. He nodded thoughtfully, then leaned forward and said, "You don't have to force it, Bill. You just have to be honest. That's where it begins. Not with answers, with questions, with emptiness, with the courage to admit you're tired of pretending." He looked into the camera now, and his voice took on a quiet authority that didn't demand belief but invited it. If that's you tonight, if you've built a life on strength, success, intellect, but something still feels missing, then maybe you're not weak. Maybe you're just ready. And if you're still watching, still breathing in the weight of this moment, I want to ask you something, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. If you've ever wondered whether you were seen, known, or loved in the deepest parts of who you are, I want you to hit like and comment the number 9. Just 9. Not for me, for you. Because maybe today isn't the end of your story, it's the page that turns. And what's coming next might just change everything. The studio was still as a cathedral. No cue cards, no clever punchlines, no applause signs. Just silence. Thick, reverent silence. Bill Maher sat slouched in his chair, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes unfocused, not because he was disinterested, but because something inside him had cracked, quietly, without warning. His fingers fiddled with his earpiece, then let go. For once, he didn't seem to care what the producers were saying. Something had shifted, and the entire audience felt it. Senator John Kennedy, still seated across from him, didn't press the moment. He didn't gloat, didn't seize the silence like a victor claiming a prize. Instead, he let the stillness breathe. Then he said, "You know, Bill, you said something earlier that stuck with me, that you just can't believe. I respect that. But belief doesn't always come from the mind. Sometimes it comes from desperation, from the moment everything else stops working." His voice was calm, the same kind of calm you hear at a bedside when someone's life is about to change forever. Bill looked up, his voice lower than before. "I've read the Bible, Senator. I've read it, I've debated it, I've even laughed at it. But if I'm honest," he paused. His jaw tightened as if admitting the next part might cost him something. "I don't think I've ever needed it." And there it was, the confession. Not the kind shouted at rallies or whispered in confessionals, but the kind that slips out quietly, exposed and raw. Kennedy didn't respond with scripture. He didn't pull out another letter or quote a verse. He just leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees, and asked one question. "Bill, have you ever lost someone you loved and couldn't fix it?" Bill blinked. And for the first time all night, he looked small. Not because he was defeated, but because he was human. "My mother," he whispered. "Lung cancer. Took her in 6 months. She was tough, brilliant, stubborn as hell, but she got scared at the end." His voice cracked. "And I didn't know what to say to her." Kennedy nodded gently. "That's the moment I'm talking about. When intellect isn't enough, when all your arguments fall silent in the face of suffering, that's when grace walks in." A hush fell again. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a funeral. It was a living room. It was the hallway of a hospital. The show had melted away, and what remained was one man trying to make sense of the hole that loss leaves behind, and another man offering him something more than words. And then, just when the weight of the moment felt too heavy to bear, another voice called out, from the audience. Soft, but clear. "Senator, may I say something?" All heads turned. A young woman stood up. Early 20s, brown curls tucked behind her ears, trembling hands clasped in front of her chest. "I'm not religious," she said, "but I'm a counselor at a teen crisis center. 2 weeks ago, a girl came in after a suicide attempt, 17 years old. She had a Bible with her. I asked her why she brought it, and she said, 'Because someone once told me there's a verse that says God is near when you're broken.'" A quiet sob escaped from somewhere in the back row. The young woman continued, her voice stronger now. "We found the verse, Psalm 34-18. It calmed her down. She's still with us. She's alive." She turned to Kennedy. "So thank you for reminding people of what still matters." The camera caught it all. Maher's eyes welling, the crowd slowly rising to their feet. The studio, a place built for satire and cynicisms, transformed into something closer to sacred ground. Kennedy looked out at them, his voice thick but steady. "That's why I carry this book, not to prove a point, not to win a debate, but because someone, somewhere, is always standing on the edge of something. And sometimes, all it takes is one verse to pull them back." He stood, not dramatically, just with purpose. Walked slowly to the center of the stage and looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, and you're tired, or lost, or angry, or numb, I want you to know you are not alone. You are seen. You are loved, and there is still hope." Bill remained seated, staring at his hands. For a moment, it looked like he was going to speak, but he didn't. Instead, he just nodded slowly, deliberately, and wiped his eyes with the side of his finger. And maybe, just maybe, that was the loudest statement of the night. If you've ever sat where Bill sat holding on to pain you couldn't explain, then you know the courage it takes to even listen to words like these. And if you're still here, still breathing in this moment, I want to ask you to do something vulnerable, something bold. Click like, comment the number 9. Let it be your way of saying, "I'm still in this. I'm still searching. I still believe something deeper might be real." Because the story's not over yet. And what happens next might just be the part where everything begins to change. The camera stayed wide as the stage dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the floor where just minutes ago sarcasm had ruled. Now, there was a quiet weight in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. Bill Maher hadn't said a word in several minutes, and that alone was seismic. His audience, long used to his sharp tongue and lightning speed takedowns, watched him closely not for what he might say next, but for what his silence meant. Senator John Kennedy stood at the center of the stage, his Bible still in hand, its leather cover now soft with age and use. He turned back toward Bill, slowly, his voice low but strong, the kind of voice you hear at a graveside, or whispered at 3 a.m. to someone barely holding on. "Bill," he said, "I wasn't trying to change your mind tonight. I was trying to reach your heart, but now, I think, maybe your heart's been waiting to speak this whole time." Bill looked up, eyes red. Not from tears alone, but from what happens when someone realizes they've spent years building walls that no longer serve them. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. For a man who always had the last word, it was unnerving to watch him come up empty. And that's when it happened. A staff member from the show one of Bill's own camera operators stepped forward from behind the curtain. He looked nervous, uncertain if he should speak, but something in his face said this moment had been waiting a long time. "Sorry," he said, his voice cracking over the microphone he didn't realize was hot. "I know this isn't part of the show, but I gotta say something." The audience turned as one. Even Kennedy turned slightly, surprised. "I've worked this studio for 12 years, the man said, and I've seen hundreds of guests sit in that chair trying to look smart or sound enlightened. But I've never seen someone come in here and just speak from the soul. My dad died last year, and I haven't been to church since I was 15. But something about what you said, Senator, about grace, it got to me." Bill shifted in his seat, stunned. The staffer paused, then added, "I just wanted to say thank you for reminding me that maybe there's still something out there bigger than this job, bigger than this set, bigger than all of this." The audience erupted, not in laughter, not in applause, but in something purer, real emotion, real recognition. A ripple of sniffles, hand squeezes, head nods swept across the room like a rising tide. For a moment, no one cared about ratings or run times. Something was happening that couldn't be scripted. Kennedy smiled gently. "Thank you, brother," he said. "That's the kind of truth that matters." And then, as if everything had been building toward this, Bill Maher finally stood, slowly. Not with his usual swagger or smirk, but with a strange kind of reverence. He stepped toward Kennedy, looked down at the Bible in his hand, and said, "Can I hold that for a second?" Gasps filled the room. Kennedy looked at him, not as a foe, but as a fellow traveler. He handed the Bible over, no hesitation, no speech, just a silent transfer of something sacred. Bill held it awkwardly at first, like it was heavier than he expected. Then he turned to the audience, his voice soft. "I've made a living out of poking holes in things. Religion, politics, institutions, and maybe some of that's been necessary. But maybe I poked so many holes that I forgot what it's like to just hold something whole." He looked at the cover again. "I'm not saying I believe, not yet, but I'm saying for the first time I want to." The audience stood, not clapping, just standing, moved, changed. Kennedy stepped closer, not to embrace him, not to celebrate, but to meet him where he was. "That's all faith ever asks," he said. "Not certainty, just a willingness to be found." The camera zoomed out slowly, capturing the two men standing there, one still trembling, the other steady as a rock. Not enemies, not opponents, just two souls facing the same question with different levels of clarity. And maybe that's what we all are, in the end, souls looking for something solid in a world full of shifting sand. So if you're still here, watching this moment, feeling something you didn't expect to feel from a show like this, I want you to do something small but real. Tap like, comment 9 below. Not as a trend, but as a turning point. Say what your heart won't say out loud. I'm not done yet. I'm still searching. And maybe, just maybe, there's something more. Because tonight, in a place built for comedy, something sacred broke through, and you were part of it. The moment lingered like the final chord of a hymn, reverent, unresolved, echoing through the hearts of everyone watching. Bill Maher stood still, the Bible cradled gently in his hands, like it might slip through his fingers if he breathed too hard. The lights overhead dimmed ever so slightly, not as part of the show's design, but as if the room itself knew something holy had happened and didn't want to interrupt it. Senator John Kennedy didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't absence, it was presence. It was the kind of stillness that invited reflection, the kind that didn't demand an answer but made you look inward for one. He glanced out at the audience, and for the first time that night, no one was looking at their phones. No one was whispering or laughing or checking the time. They were all locked in, not because they were being entertained, but because something inside them had been stirred. Then a voice came out from the stage, not from a producer, but from the back of the room. An older man stood up slowly, his hand raised slightly like a student in class. "May I?" he said. All heads turned. Even Bill looked over, startled but curious. The man stepped into the aisle, wearing a veteran's cap, weathered denim, and eyes that had clearly seen more than their fair share of pain. "My name's Walter," he said, his voice gravelly but strong. "I lost my wife 2 years ago. 54 years we were married. When she passed, I didn't want to live. I didn't think I could. But one night, I found her old Bible tucked behind a stack of recipe books. It still smelled like her perfume." His voice cracked, and he paused, steadying himself. There was a note inside it. Said, "If you're reading this after I'm gone, don't you dare give up on God. I'll be waiting." A few people gasped. Others wiped their eyes. Walter continued, "That book didn't give me all the answers, but it gave me just enough strength to get out of bed, just enough to keep breathing. And tonight, hearing all this, I just want to say thank you, Senator. Thank you for not being ashamed of what saved you." Bill looked down at the Bible again, like it had suddenly gained weight. Not the physical kind, but the kind that presses on the soul. "I used to think this book was a weapon," he said quietly. "Used to think it was used to divide, to judge, to shame. And maybe it has been, but maybe that wasn't the book's fault. Maybe it's because the people holding it forgot who they were holding it for." Kennedy nodded slowly. "That's the difference, Bill. You don't hold it to feel powerful. You hold it because you aren't, because you know there are days when your strength runs out, and you need someone greater than yourself to carry you." The camera captured every flicker of doubt, every tear, every silent confession playing across the faces in the room. This wasn't television anymore. This was church. Not the kind with pews or organs or stained glass, but the kind that happens when truth shows up and sits beside you without asking for credentials. And then, as if the room had agreed without speaking, the audience began to stand, one by one, not with fanfare, not with cheers, just reverently, quietly, like they were witnessing something sacred. Some stood with hands over their hearts, others with heads bowed. A few lifted their hands not for applause, but in surrender. Bill Maher looked out over the crowd, visibly trembling now. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "I don't know what to do with this." Kennedy stepped beside him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just don't run from it." For a long moment, they stood side by side opposites on paper, but now connected by something deeper than belief, the ache for truth, the hunger for peace, the hope that it's not too late. And if you're still watching this, still sitting in front of your screen with that strange pressure in your chest, wondering why a late-night talk show feels like a sacred encounter, maybe that's not an accident. Maybe, just maybe, your moment is now too. Maybe this is the episode your soul was waiting for. So take a breath. Let the silence in. And if you feel something impressing on your heart, don't ignore it. Click like. Leave a comment with the number 9. Let it be your way of saying, "I'm ready for more." Not more noise, not more opinions, but more truth. Because what comes next could be the start of something you never knew you needed. The studio had never felt so quiet, not even during commercial breaks, not even during backstage resets. It wasn't the silence of boredom or hesitation. It was the silence of awakening, the kind that settles into your bones when you've witnessed something real, something that doesn't just entertain, but transforms. Bill Maher was no longer the host of a show. He was just a man holding a worn Bible in trembling hands, his eyes searching the floor as if trying to make peace with all the years he had spent laughing at the very thing now unraveling his soul. Senator John Kennedy stood beside him, not triumphant, not proud, just present, fully present. The way someone is when they know heaven just cracked open a little, right in front of them. "I don't know what happens after this," Bill said quietly, his voice almost too low for the mic. "I don't know if I go back to being me, or if something has to change." Kennedy didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air, giving it weight. Then he spoke not like a politician, not like a preacher, but like a friend. "You don't have to change all at once. You just have to take the next step. That's how faith works, not with lightning, with a whisper." Bill looked up at him, and for the first time all night, his face softened into something almost childlike, vulnerable, wide-eyed, maybe even hopeful. The audience stood still, like a congregation waiting for the benediction. Some held hands, others had their arms around each other's shoulders. They hadn't come for this. But maybe this was what they had needed all along. Kennedy turned toward the camera, toward the millions who would see this later, some scrolling in bed, some sitting alone in a dark room, some on the edge of decisions that could change their lives forever. And in a voice full of grace, he said, "If this moment stirred something in you, don't brush it off. Don't rush past it. Stop. Breathe. Ask yourself what you're really chasing and what's really chasing you. He placed his hand on his heart. I believe it's not coincidence you're watching this. I believe someone's been reaching for you all along. Then came the final pause. The moment that would echo across comment sections, across quiet hearts, across a noisy, divided world. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it shows up in the quietest room, on the unlikeliest night, with the person you least expected. So I'll ask you now, not as a senator, but as someone who's been found, what if this is your moment? What if the thing you've been resisting is the very thing that's been loving you all along? The screen faded to black, and in white letters, one question remained. What are you still holding on to? And is it worth more than the truth trying to set you free? If something in you said, yes, 7, quietly hit like, and comment 9 below, let the world know you felt it too, because this wasn't just a conversation. It was a rescue, and maybe it was meant for you.